Welcome back to Maine Take. My name is Dana Connors, and it's my pleasure to be the host for this weekly program brought to you on Mondays of every week at 3 o'clock. Let me correct that. Starting on April the 20th, we are going to be having this program brought to you on Tuesdays, not at 3 o'clock, but at noon. That's been a request that has been made by viewers, and we're happy to respond. While that may change, what doesn't change is the program intent. Every week, be it on a Monday or a Tuesday at 3 o'clock or at noontime, we'll be bringing to you people working to make a difference in your life. We'll be bringing to you initiatives, ideas, programs at work in our state to grow our economy, to help us open doors to new opportunities. And clearly that is the case today with our two guests. Let me introduce them to you now. The first is Representative Kristen Cloutier from Lewiston and Tae Chong from Portland. They indeed are two people at work making a difference, and you are about to see how they are doing that. They are with us today to discuss the important role of immigration in our state and helping us meet our workforce needs, but also to open the door to opportunities, particularly market opportunities. So let's begin with Representative Kristen Cloutier. Kristen, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. For those who don't know Kristen, if you have anything to do with the legislature, by all means you do. She sits on that very important Appropriations Committee, but she's also had a long service at the local level, being on the City Council for a number of terms, and more recently was mayor, and before that, president of the council. Kristen, however, in this past 2 terms that she has served our state, she has distinguished herself when it comes to the role, the importance, and how to help the immigration community become a part of our state's economy. Let me begin by recognizing that this is the Monday following Easter holiday, and I'll bet in many churches, cathedrals, and the like, that the hymn that probably was shared with most of the congregations was a hymn called the Hymn of Promise. And the message of that hymn is, from the past comes our future. And you know, when you think of immigration impact in our state, it begins with recognizing that many of us, in fact, are offspring, maybe 1, 2, or the 3rd generation of people who have come to our state. In my case, from Ireland, who, because they left that country either because of seeking opportunity or escaping oppression. And they came by way of Canada, but we also know that they were not the only population that shared that. Many came from different countries, and in many instances were not well welcomed. They didn't find it easy to acclimate into the community. And probably it lends credence to those words of, while things may change, as things change, some things stay the same. Because today we recognize that we have a very strong immigration influence in our state, Lewiston, Portland, to name 2. And frankly, they are extremely important when it comes to addressing our demographic issue as well as our workforce issue. And I think that nobody knows that better than you in terms of what you're doing to help the immigration community, the influence they bring to our state by way of legislative issues. So let's begin. I'm hopeful that this isn't too personal, but because of your leadership and because of the strong interest you've taken in immigration, what brought you to that place? What was your experience that today represents itself in the strong leadership positions you're taking on their behalf?
Well, first, Dana, let me thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. And, you know, for me, serving locally really kind of brought me to this place. You know, we have a very large, diverse population here in Lewiston. Our immigrant population is largely responsible for the early revitalization of downtown Lisbon Street and sort of entrepreneurship and getting businesses going, bringing foot traffic, creating a much more lively community downtown. And when I was on the council, I co-chaired an immigrant integration and policy development working group, and really sort of created some personal relationships there. My mother-in-law also does some volunteering at the Franco-American Heritage Center. And we see a lot of members of our asylum seeking population who are French speakers, because they're waiting to get work permits, are also doing volunteer work there. And so she actually became very friendly with a lot of them through speaking French and creating those personal relationships, and actually converted her basement to a bedroom where some of these folks are able to live because they aren't able to work prior to getting their work permits. So part of it was around policy, and part of it was really just around kind of, creating personal relationships with folks and hearing their stories.
Well, that's sometimes the most fulfilling and lasting when you have those personal relationships. Why don't you share with our viewers, because I'm very impressed with your efforts in terms of dealing with some of the barriers that our new Mainers face when they come to our state and want to become part of our community, whether it's a second language or whether it's getting their work credentials in place. So why don't you speak to some of the initiatives that you put forth in the legislature to address those concerns or others?
Sure. So in my first term, Senator Roger Cates had introduced LD 1492, which was a bill that increased funding for adult ed programs across the state, and also sort of created this pilot program and workforce development initiative that created on-the-job training at businesses. And it was modeled after a program that Barber Foods had put together, which is now Tyson Foods. And David Barber has been a real proponent of this legislation. And that bill made it to the appropriations table and then wasn't funded. And so when Senator Cates didn't come back to the legislature, termed out, I decided that I was going to sort of pick up the mantle and reintroduce that bill. And so last session, reintroduced the bill. It was voted unanimously out of committee and made it to the floor of the House and the Senate and was voted onto the table. And then, as with so many other good bills, this past session died upon adjournment because of the pandemic. So again, decided I was going to carry that torch forward again. And so my bill this session, it hasn't made it out of the revisor's office yet. It's LR 1095. And again, it would increase funding for language acquisition through our adult education programs, because that is, I would say, the number one barrier to folks being able to get employment and being able to really reach their full potential in terms of that employment. And then also creates, again, that on-the-job training piece, which incorporates the language acquisition piece. So not only are we increasing funding through adult ed for language skills, which may be more basic, but we're also allowing for language acquisition through on-the-job training at an employer site that is much more specific to the job that that person may fill. And so, places like Barber Foods in the state, which is a larger employer, has been able to fund those things themselves. This really allows for small businesses, which we know is the sort of staple of Maine economy, allows them to do similar things.
Yeah. You've also been instrumental, and you touched upon it, about helping so many of our immigrants that come to our state. The new Mainer brings with them credentials, certificates, training, and skills that we're not taking advantage of. We're not utilizing them in a way that would serve our workforce the way we want it. And the bill would help to do that. It's LD 149 is its term, but can you speak to that for a moment or two?
Yeah, so that is sort of a new initiative this session. It's LD 149, and it really lowers the barriers for folks to get credentials and licenses that they have from other jurisdictions, states, and countries so that folks can practice their professions here. So our asylum seeking population tends to be highly educated. There are folks that are engineers or nurses or doctors or lawyers in their home countries. They come here and then they have a hard time getting those credentials transitioned. The one thing, there are a couple bills in this session that are around credentialing and licensure. I would say that what differentiates LD 149 from those other two bills is its focus on the foreign trained and foreign educated, but also the idea that we want to reduce those barriers, but we also want to maintain quality around those credentials and licenses. We don't want Maine to be the lowest common denominator state when it comes to credentialing. And so this strikes a balance between those two things in a really good way, I think.
No, I think it does. And I think that whether it's English as a second language or whether it's recognizing without sacrificing quality that they do bring skills and training and a certain experience that serves our workforce challenge in this state in a very significant way. Time goes by fast, but one last question. What are your hopes for this session? I mean, there's more recognition. You've been persistent. Are you hopeful?
I'm always hopeful.
Yeah.
And I think I get some of that hope from members of our immigrant population because the resilience that they show is pretty remarkable. And I think we'll just keep, plugging away at this. It's part of the Economic Recovery Committee's report. It was part of the Permanent Commission's report. These are recommendations that have come from, so many places, and we've seen that it's best practice. We've seen it work at places, like I said, like Barber Foods. And I think we just have to, make it happen.
Well, we are hopeful and we appreciate your efforts on behalf of our economy and the new Mainers that we welcome here and want them to be acclimated into our community as well as our economy. We thank you for that leadership. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You too.
Our next guest is also a very special advocate, educator, policymaker. For 25 years, he has been immersed in diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think I saw his very first presentation at the Lewiston Auburn Chamber of Commerce when I was struck by the market opportunities that exist when you look at the ethnic populations, the various cultures that we have in the state, as well as the opportunity that presents itself when you look at our two neighboring states, just New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Tae, it's a pleasure to have you with us as always. I'm hopeful and anxious for our audience to be able to see what you have to say in terms of this incredible opportunity. So tell us about that.
Well, thank you, Dana. I really appreciate this. And I don't want to age myself, but I actually helped Barber Foods with Rob Wood create that financial literacy class about 15 years ago. And so I've been around for a long time. And the market opportunities is that most people don't understand how large this population is. We've got about 100,000 people of color living in the state of Maine. That doesn't include people from the Middle East. So the multicultural and multiracial population in Maine is over 100,000 people. And we've got about 10,000 multicultural students taking classes in our colleges and universities. So we have a very large number of people. And the purchasing power of just the people of color, not the Middle Eastern population or college students, is almost $3 billion in the state of Maine, which is a significant large number. So we have an incredible opportunity to try to figure out where are they shopping, what could they purchase, whether they want to buy homes in the state of Maine. And that totality is, I think, sometimes forgotten. We kind of look at the deficit model rather than the asset model of the immigrants and refugee and people of color contributing to the state of Maine.
Mm. So I understand you have some slides that help depict that. Is that, am I correct about that? Okay.
Just trying to figure out if I can share the screen and let's see. So it's just basically three numbers I just wanted to share. And, it's quite telling that, in the state of Maine, the the purchasing power is $3 trillion. But the other thing that people don't realize is that in the tri-state area, we have about 2.5 million people of color living in the state, in the tri-state area. And so, just the people of color is $2.7 billion. And then the tri-state area people of color purchasing power is what people have left over after taxes. It's about $94 billion. And we have about 2.5 million people of color just living in the tri-state area, which is a very significant number because, as you know, Maine is the oldest state in the nation. We have more deaths and births, but we forget that there are 2.5 million people of color living here, and their median age is much lower. And we have more deaths than births in the state of Maine, but from 2019 to 2024, the people of color population is going to grow by 15%. So that trend of people of color in the tri-state area is going to continue. And so that market's going to continue, their purchasing power is going to continue. And it's a national trend that we need to tap into. If we can figure out what that is in our own backyard in the tri-state area, the potential for the entire country is almost $5 trillion, which would make it the 5th largest economy in the state of Maine, in the world.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think it's something that very few of us realize, the market potential that really exists. Can you share with us kind of a breakdown of the various cultures that do exist here in Maine?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That's the thing that most people don't understand, is that the multicultural, multiracial population is not a monolith. Just in the city of Portland alone, we have over 60 languages spoken and over 50 nationalities represented. And so this is a brand new population that marketers have not researched. But there's an opportunity there to figure out, what those different populations are purchasing or not purchasing, because it's a great sample size that you could then apply to the entire country. It's also important for us to figure out what the new population is going to be, because that is the only population in the entire nation, as well as the state of Maine, that's going to be growing. So if we could study that population, it's going to be important for us as a state to figure out what are populations like ours in the state of Maine that's going to be purchasing our seafood or our retail or vacationing or education, or willing to move to Maine to be able to live here.
Yeah, for purposes of full disclosure, my next question is probably one that you could predict what it's going to be. And that is, once you understand the potential that exists and that it's a win-win, both for the culture itself, but also for the business community in Maine, whether it's banking, whether it's retail, whatever the case may be. My question is, the state chamber is extremely interested in being able to help you accomplish the task of connecting the two. How do you propose to go about doing that?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to be able to research this population and to have someone to study this population and to be able to create marketing opportunities and market opportunities. Nielsen Prism, even at the national level, Nielsen Prism has 70 different categories of types of, that people could be potential consumers, but they don't drill down when it comes to multicultural populations. And in the New England area, no one really understands this population because it grew by threefold in 30 years. And so this is a new topic that needs to be researched and studied so that businesses can see opportunities. Like, for example, in Portland alone, there's 50 landscapers. And so that's a market where, Grow Ford or car manufacturers could figure out, who are these landscapers? They're actually 50 Hispanic landscapers. And so they could figure out, do we need to have a Hispanic salesperson? Do we need to change our marketing materials? Are we as a car dealership welcoming to them? It also opens up other opportunities like Home Depot or Wex Cards or other things. And it takes a researcher, I think, at the state chamber level to be able to, educate the state chamber members of those opportunities.
Yeah, no, it's well said. And so the next step is to do just that. And the chamber wants to take on this initiative to not just introduce the opportunity to the business community and to our multicultural populations, but do it in a way that benefits both populations and do it so that we can take advantage of it. Now that we know it, it'd be shameful to turn our back on the incredible opportunity. Tae, I can't thank you enough. For 25 years, you've been beating this drum. And I think we're getting close to having it pay off, and it's because of you, my friend. So thank you so much. And I look forward to our next chapter together and trying to tell the story and take advantage of it. So thanks, Tae.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Now let's turn our attention to our weekly guest, Peter Van Allen, who is the editor of Mainebiz, who each week comes to us to give us kind of a what's up on Mainebiz this week. Peter? Welcome back.
Dan. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. It's always nice to be a guest on the Maine Take. I appreciate you inviting me back, Dana. And an interesting guest too. I mean, such a great topic. The topic I was going to talk about today is near and dear to the heart of Mainebiz, and it's real estate. We love covering real estate stories. And one of the more interesting stories that's come up recently, Dana, is so 4 years ago, the city of Portland decided it was going to sell off its public works site in the Bayside neighborhood. We were talking about 3 or 4 square blocks that could be open for redevelopment. And in a city where there's so much pressure on development and trying to come up with new housing, and just, you know, the land is scarce there, this presented a great opportunity. It was divided into 6 parcels. And now we're seeing that the last of the 6 parcels is finally about to come up for redevelopment here. This will be a project at 52 Hanover Street. The developer is Tom Watson, and he's planning 171 apartments, of which about 20 of those would be sort of workforce housing. As we know, housing is in short supply. This doesn't necessarily address all the affordable housing that's needed, but it is a very significant apartment building that's going to go up. It'll have retail on the ground floor. It's almost 240,000 square feet in all. So it's a good sized building, $50 million project, which represents a lot of construction jobs, of course. So over this 4-year period, and we've seen developers like the Stanton Company and Jack Soley and Ford Reiki and Rob Barrett have done parcels previous to this. This is the last piece of the pie. And by my tally and by the Mainebiz tally that we had, it's about 270 housing units that have been developed as a result of this former public works site being redeveloped. And of course, all the retail, and there's restaurants and that sort of thing, and some commercial space. So it's pretty significant. This was sort of a hole in the donut on the peninsula that's being redeveloped, and it's a big transformation for that neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Portland, it's amazing in the last couple of decades how much development has taken place within the downtown urban area. And once again, you bring us a story of significance in terms of how you took a piece of property that at its time was perfect, probably a perfect location, but now the reuse of it is probably the most appropriate for the times that we're in. We love hearing stories from Mainebiz. We love Mainebiz, and it's great having you on this week as every week, Peter, and look forward to having you back next week with another positive story. We love that. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Dana.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Now let's turn our attention to what's happening in Augusta on the legislative front. And to do that, I am pleased to welcome our 3 members of the Chamber's Advocacy team. They are incredible representatives for the business community here in Augusta, and we also take issues to Washington as well. But today, without getting into detail and letting you explain, not me, we know that, believe it or not, the first regular session of the 130th has come to an end as of last Tuesday. in which a budget mirroring actually what was approved in the previous session of 8.3 billion was approved. It was approved not by the traditional means, which is 2/3, but by a majority, a vote. That carries with it some implications going forward, because we've seen in the rare occasions it's been used in the past, there are some lingering fallout. It leaves a bad taste in some people's mouth, and such is the case this year. So there's 2 more chapters to this story that we predict, and I'm going to let the staff tell you what those 2 chapters are and what will be done in the next, well, essentially 3 months, more or less. We hope it's less, not more. But Peter, you want to kick it off?
Sure thing, Dana, and thanks. As you indicated, the legislature did go home after passing a budget. The reason they did that is because if you pass a budget without as a non-emergency document, as a regular piece of legislation, it usually doesn't become effective law until 90 days after the legislature adjourns. So by adjourning on the 30th of this month, 90 days would be June 30th. So it would be just before the state's fiscal year begins. So that's why they did what they did, and logistically, operationally, after passing the majority budget. And as you said, it does leave some hard feelings. It's only been done twice, and the last one was 15 years ago, 16. Mm-hmm. So it remains to be seen how the legislature gets past this. This is a session where it's a lot harder for people to develop interpersonal relationships because you're not meeting face to face. I mean, I think we've talked about that. Everyone's talking about it. It's virtual most of the time. So you're just a 4x2 inch square on somebody's screen. And that's hard to get to know your fellow legislators and bond with them as a lawmaking experience. And that's a key element of the whole process, is those interpersonal relationships. And it's things that we miss as lobbyists as well. It makes our job tougher by not having them. Now, the challenge will be to develop a supplemental budget, as well as how to spend the ARPA monies that the state will be receiving from the feds as a result of the Biden administration's COVID relief plans. A lot of that money is going to be tied up, or how that money is spent is going to be tied up in regulations and rules that the federal government is currently in the process of promulgating. And I don't think they're designed to be ongoing expenses, but more towards one-time funding projects. But that sort of remains to be seen. And then you have the rest of everything else, all the other bills that are out there and where all those bills stand in the process. And we didn't rehearse this, so I'm going to throw it to Ben, though, to let him talk, because he knows what that process is as we go forward and why they're continuing to meet, even though they're technically not in session and won't be back in session until the end of the month. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And you're right. The committee's continuing to meet in the process, and they'll meet until they come back into session on April 28th. And one of the bills I want to talk about, even though we had that majority budget passed last week and the unknown as we move forward, is the committees are, like the Education Committee is very busy this week and meeting and dealing with legislation. There's a bill that has good bipartisan support in the committee right now, LD 313, and it deals with expanding our career and technical education programs here in the state of Maine. Right now, we know them as the vocational programs that start your junior and senior year. And LD 313, which has support from Republicans and Democrats, looks at, starting that a little bit earlier, getting kids, engaged in freshman, sophomore year, and looking at expanding the programs as well, because we know the workforce shortage, whether we look at the Economic Recovery Committee or the governor's 10-year plan, like that's going to be a real issue as a state moving forward. So hopefully legislation like 313 that have bipartisan support as we move forward through this legislative session, we'll see people continue to work together and put the budget from last week behind them and come out on the other end working together. But that's yet to be seen, as we all know, if we look at the past in terms of majority budgets and how the legislature has worked afterwards. But I'm hoping this week, as we see a lot of committee work, will be done in a bipartisan fashion. So Linda, I know you got a big bill over in the IDEA committee that you probably want to discuss as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the taxation committee first, they've tabled a lot of bills, particularly some of the more contentious bills like the income tax bills that would increase income taxes, both on the individual and the corporate side. So a lot of those bills have been tabled pending a number of other bills coming in on the same issue. We still haven't seen about a half a dozen of those. One bill in particular is a work session tomorrow. It's LD 229. It's the Maine Seed Capital Tax Program, credit program. And what this would do is increase the amount of annual caps and aggregate caps that taxpayers can take for credit purposes. And really, the credit really hasn't been fully utilized. So this increases the caps, which makes more sense for the companies that already are eligible to receive those credits. In addition, this credit program is also been identified under the state strategic plan as, broadly aligning with its goals in terms of increasing wages, increasing jobs, and increasing value of products. So it's an important program, particularly for venture capitalists. The other bill I want to talk about is LD 730. This is the Pine Tree Development Zone bill. This bill would basically extend the Pine Tree Zone Development Program out 3 years to 2024. It's a really important bill for Maine companies. There's over, I think, 160 companies that are currently certified. So this is really a huge bill. This is one of the only, one of the primary economic development programs we have here in the state. So we really need to keep this. And this bill is going to be worked again. It was tabled in the IDEA committee. It will be worked at some point down the road, pending some work that OPEGA is doing on this program for the Government Oversight Committee. So we'll have to wait and see, but we're urging folks, if you are concerned about this program, to let your local legislators know.
Yeah, I think all three of you have reinforced the point that the legislative process enters chapter 2, which is not in session. However, the committees will continue their work. There's a lot of work that will be done in this next month. And when they come back the last couple of days of April, we know when the session will actually, the special session will actually begin. Both May and June are going to be very active months. And we all recognize what Representative Cloutier indicated, that her leadership position on immigration was partly because of a strong relationship with the new Mainers that had come to their community. A similar statement can be made about the value of relationships when it comes to seeking the best results. And in that regard, we hope that the majority that passed this budget can be put behind us, and that people really will come together to look at the new expenditures, to look at the new initiatives, to spend the money that would come in our way as a result of the America Rescue Plan. That's our hope, and we hope it's a 2/3 result. Thank you, team. Appreciate you being on. Look forward to seeing you. I was going to say next Monday, but I hope to see you before then, that's for sure. So with that, thanks a lot. Let me take a moment and this week's takeaway to reflect on essentially what our guests have shared with us today. And that is the importance of what immigration means to our state, whether it's meeting the workforce needs or opening the doors to new market opportunities. The State Chamber, in cooperation with the Maine Development Foundation, a few years ago looked at workforce as one of our most critical needs in our state. It was both a challenge in terms of providing our people with the skills that they needed for the new economy, but also recognizing that we needed to grow our workforce. It was extremely important. And we just have been witness to the state strategic plan for the next 10 years saying that that will be one of our 3 major pillars of growing Maine's economy. So workforce, both in preparation as well as in growing our workforce, a skills supply, if you will, but also along with innovation and those key investments that we need to make to grow our economy. Why is that so important, and how does immigration play into that? Well, we've heard today that in the strategic plan, let's pick up at that point. In the strategic plan, the governors efforts say that we need 75,000 new workers in our economy. That in itself is a pretty high goal when you think of what the recent success has been in terms of bringing people to our state. But you need to know that we're going to lose 65,000 people with a net of only 10,000. And that's because we have come to realize that we are the oldest state in the nation. And we have the second lowest birth rate in the nation. In fact, 1 out of 5 of us are over 65. The baby boomers between 1946 and 64 represent 30% of our population. You know, even if we kept all of our youth at home, we wouldn't have enough to offset those who are retiring. Even if we brought back people who had moved away, and we're seeing some of that, that too won't be enough. But perhaps most convincing of all is the national standard that says between 2000 and 2050, 83% of our growth in the workforce will come from the immigrant and the immigrant community. That's an astounding percentage, and it really reinforces the value, the need to welcome the immigrant community to our state and to be sure that we incorporate them into our workforce, just as Representative Cloutier and the legislature hopes to do. But Tae brought to us an incredible market opportunity, which today is probably a lost opportunity, and that is our multicultural populations. His analysis reminds us that there are over 100,000 of people of color in our state: Hispanic, Black, Asian, Native American, multicultural, and they represent $3 billion of purchasing power. $3 billion, 100,000 plus people of color. But when you add to that New Hampshire and Massachusetts, the population of people with color is 2.5 million, and the purchasing power reaches 94 billion. Yeah, this is an opportunity we cannot afford to deny or turn our backs on. This program, this day, reminds us so much of the opportunity that we have and the need to deal with it. It's often said that your demographics are your destiny. And if you look at our current demographic, you could predict a very real threat or a real opportunity. And our guests today have made us realize that it is an opportunity because they've showed us both the way to do it and why we should. And they also make us realize that demographics are not set in stone, and reminds us that the best way to predict your future is to create it. That is our takeaway for this week. I am pleased that you were with us once again, and in that regard, I thank you. I thank our sponsors, and I also thank our very impressive guests. I ask that you remember that starting on April 20th, we will be bringing this program with the same emphasis on people and things that work in our state, but it won't be at 3 o'clock on a Monday. It'll be at noontime on a Tuesday. So until then, although next week will be on Monday, not to confuse you, but until then, please be kind to yourself and be kind to one another. And with that, I thank you. Good day and good week. We'll see you next week.